Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to our global community. This is Jon Ferrara, and again, I'm super excited about being able to host a webinar with somebody like my dear friend Tibor to inspire and educate other about how they can achieve their dreams through better process. And I think that Tibor, you kind of hit it when you started talking about how can you more effectively execute and message in your whole sales process. And so why don't you just say hello to everybody, Tibor?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thank you for joining us today.
So let's learn a little bit about you, Tibor. Let's go to your intro slide. Tibor, you and I met in the digital social river years ago. And the way that we met is I started to swim in the social river and I looked for content and people that inspired and educated me. And I came across you and I began to share your content, and that led to a relationship that's lasted over time. And I just wanted to first thank you for your kind relationship and your inspiration, and for you being willing to come and share a little bit of that with our audience.
Well, it's my pleasure.
You clearly have the chops to talk about this, as you help many Fortune 50 to startup companies do exactly that, execute on the sales process, achieve their revenue goals by more effectively managing their sales cycle. And so I can't wait. For those of you that don't know me, here's a little bit about me. I'm all about relationships, and I struggle to manage them just like all of you. That makes me different is I got a computer science degree and bought a computer in 1978, worked my way through my computer science degree in a Computerland store, and learned about software. And when I got put into sales and tried to manage the sales process, I struggled like we all do. And back then there was no Outlook or Salesforce or CRM or contact management. So I quit my job and started a company called Goldmine, and sold that when I was 40, and I got back in the business because I started to use social media and saw it was going to change the way we work, play, buy, and sell. Looked for a tool to solve that problem, couldn't find it, and we built Nimble. And so I'm back in the saddle and enjoying the process. So let's do a little housekeeping. We do webinars daily at Nimble. Sign up for them at nimble.com company webinars. We do daily Q&A sessions. We do weekly webinars, and then we do monthly case studies and content like this with Tibor. And with that, Tibor, take us away. Let's cover the agenda. One bit of housekeeping left. Please, please, please ask questions. That's how we all learn. We will be compiling the questions in the background and answering them digitally in the background, but then en masse at the end. Thank you, Tibor. Take us away.
Thank you, and welcome again, everybody. And as you can see from the agenda, we're going to be looking at value from various angles, and throughout the presentation today we'll talk about how to communicate value in a noisy world, and it is noisier than ever. We'll look at the why versus the what and the how, which is usually the conversation that takes place. And as John alluded to at the top, we are going to share an actionable definition of value and share why that's important. And pain is lame. I don't like it, don't like to give it. I don't know why salespeople are obsessed by it. And then we'll talk about how to use all that to improve your execution, because again, whether you look at it as being the last word in sales or that everything else in sales is primarily just talk. So one of the things that I find interesting about salespeople is that when they leave the building, as it were, they tend to look at the market as being one sort of monolithic type of player. When you talk to people about how their narrative or how their approach changes by a person's time from decision, what you find is that the message doesn't really change. And that is the cause of a lot of the, I guess, harder work and some of the rejection that people face early in the cycle. Because what we found is that about 10% of your market is actively looking. So they're out there, they're the ones hitting your website, they're the ones who are willingly consuming your content, leaving their footprints behind. so we can follow up with them. And lo and behold, when we call them, they seem to be genuinely open to conversation. But you have to remember that these people came to market on their own. So you didn't have to do anything to get them to go to their keyboard and type in a search that they were thinking about. So these people came to the market on their own. They're not necessarily in pain. A lot of salespeople, as you'll see, one of the things, pain is lame. Salespeople have this notion that they've got to find the person's pain or their need or what keeps them up at night and so on. And, you know, often people are in the market because their business is growing. So if they get a large order, they're going to go out there and try to increase their capacity or buy raw material. So it's not necessarily always a pain that's driving it. But salespeople have a particular message that they use with this 10% that's actively looking. There's another 20% that's sort of what I call passively looking. So they may say to themselves, you know, this piece of machinery might have another 18 months. Last time it took me 4 months to make a selection. I got to give that a couple of months to sort of look at new features, new things. So I really don't have to start worrying about this purchase for about another 12 months before I need to be active. So while they're passive and they will consume information that comes across their way, they're not out there searching actively as the active buyers are. And the mistake the salespeople make is twofold. One is they use the same messaging with this group of people as they do with the active buyers. So already it's diluted a little bit because there isn't that same sense of urgency, because from their point of view, they have the luxury of time. The other is they tend to leave them alone for those 12 months. A lot of salespeople, when they're told to call back in 12 months, they figure they'll be Johnny on the spot and they'll diarize it for 10 months forward. But for those 10 months, they'll just sort of wait. Whereas I think those 10 to 12 months are a great time to become their emotional favorite. If you understand that you're not going to be able to cash that till next year, that's not the worst thing, because you have 10 to 12 months with which to shape their thinking, because they haven't yet made up their mind. They've deferred that decision. They will take data, they will take information. So if you can connect with them and truly engage, and not just sort of get an appointment, but truly engage, you can begin to influence their thinking. So by the time they switch to being active, or what people in marketing call going from consideration to decision, you'll be the one that they've imprinted on. But that leaves the largest group, as you can see, the 70% that's status quo. And these people are heads down, focused on their business, doing their thing. I'm not saying they don't have the same challenges and the same opportunities as the other two. It's just that of their own volition, they're not willing to recognize it. So you have to bring them into the market, whether that's through proactive outbound campaigns or picking up the telephone or smoke signals, whatever your preferred methodology is. But you can't take the same narrative to these people that you take to the people who are actively buying, because they haven't even persuaded that they have a need or a requirement or anything like that. So the first thing is try and figure out where this person is vis-a-vis their decision, and then change your approach accordingly. What I see most salespeople do is try and push, no matter where the buyer is, they try and get them into active mode. They try and get them, well, you need this now, you could benefit from it now. And I think salespeople have to accept that we're not always going to be able to move the timeline. Sometimes we will, but not always. So the next thing is, how do I stay in that person's focus? How do I become their emotional favorite? How do I stay relevant as they continue their journey towards their decision? And I think that that requires that we look at sales a little bit differently. And everybody looks at sales again as being this one thing, and we all talk about the change in sales and so forth. And I'm going to argue that that change is not as uniform and is different than what many people will make it out to be. And I'm curious about your view about this, John, as we go through. But if you break sales down into sort of 3 concentric circles or 3 areas of focus, what you have in the first one is the outer circle, if you will, are all the tools, the app, the technology, the buyers and sellers use. And there's no shortage of those on the market. And I don't know how long it takes to develop, but it seems they're doing it faster and faster. And I always say, by the time I get off the slide, there's probably been another application added to this chart somewhere. So I can understand why many salespeople and people who observe sales might look at this and say there's a whole bunch of change, but I think it's erroneous to confuse activity and volume with actual change. More of the same is just more of the same. It's not new or better. So I'm curious, from your point of view, John, like there are a lot of tools out there, but how many of those really move the dial in terms of helping salespeople do better in your sort of perception?
Well, I think that the analogy that you could apply to this is gardening tools, right? You basically open up Amazon or you go to your local Home Depot or Ace Hardware, and there's a million tools out there, and there's hundreds that come on the market on a regular basis. But ultimately, I really think it's the basics that wins game. If you don't have basic process together, it doesn't matter what type of whiz-bang tools that you use in order for you to accelerate yourself. So I think that what you're talking about are foundational, basic methods and processes. And I think that once you have those down, then tools can help. For instance, it's your job to get to know somebody, and rather than Googling them, you can Nimble them. If you're going to send a message, templates with trackable opens and clicks are great to get signals and things. But ultimately, it really comes down to the basics. And if you start to apply accelerant before you have the basics, you're going to wreck your car.
Absolutely true. So, but again, I can understand why people who are new to sales can look at this and say, hey, there's a lot of change, there's a lot going on. But again, I caution not to confuse activity and volume with actual change. So as we move forward and we go into the second circle, well, that's where there's the interplay between how buyers use these tools and how sellers use these tools. So every time salespeople get adventurous and innovative in how they use tools, buyers have the same opportunity on their side. And if we think back to the last decade when the whole concept of information parity was big, and salespeople apparently lost their value because customers can get their own brochures, they don't have to have a salesperson deliver it. Due to the tools that we saw in the outer circle and the habits of the people involved in this whole thing, information parity quickly turned to information overload. And contrary to what a lot of pundits will tell you, if you're a salesperson, that the customer is much better informed and they're, well-versed and ready to make decisions, the reality is actually quite different. If you look at some of the research that was presented in the Harvard Business Review by the CEB folks, the Challenger folks, they actually show that buyers are overwhelmed. And if you're a salesperson, I would begin to look at this as a positive, not so much from the point of view the buyers are overwhelmed, but you can bring clarity, because while information is ample, it's available out there, wisdom, knowledge, and actionable insight are quite scarce as they were before. So yes, the pundits will tell you that there's all kinds of content out there, usually because they have an agenda that they're selling that content, but customers are seeing it a bit different. More and more customers are taking longer and longer to decide. So the contradiction, they have all this information with which they can make a decision. They don't need to see us as salespeople, yet it's taking them longer than they anticipated that it would take. So over 50% are longer now than they were before. And I would argue it's because they're overwhelmed with the information. If you look at this data from Trust Radius, take a look at the stuff that I've underlined. Buyers don't find what we deliver as salespeople as being useful. They think that we overemphasize the wrong things. They don't trust. Like, again, if you're a professional and the first part of the sentence is they don't trust you, you got to step back and see what we're doing wrong. On the other hand, there is a lot of stuff that we have that we're not sharing. So buyers want hands-on experience. Well, if you're a phone jockey SDR that's never left the office, it's hard to talk about the experience that buyers would find valuable. Yet there is a treasure trove of stuff that companies can use, but they're continuing to focus on the message that strictly resonates with those people who are in active mode. So I'm going to suggest to you that buyers are actually looking for your help. And if you just step back and stop pitching and started listening, you could help them and actually stand out from that crowd in the way that you communicate things. But the one thing that hasn't changed since, the serpent sold Eve the apple way back when is the why people buy, why the active buyer sets out to make a purchase, why the passive buyer is notionally thinking about buying, and why ultimately, if you engage a status quo person, you will find that if you can get to the why they want to change or why they want to buy, you can get much greater engagement. So I've been making this premise that you need to vary the message away from pain and needs and so forth. So I'll put it out there, and if you want to take a second to answer in the question box, what's the one thing that all three groups of buyers have in common? That is the active, the passive, and the status quo buyers. If you want to put some answers into the question box. You need something? So I'm going to argue that often people don't have a need. And I'm sure that every good salesperson can share with you a story where they were able to sell something to somebody that had value where the buyer didn't perceive a need beforehand. But the one thing that I'll argue that comes into it is they all have objectives, whether you're in pain, whether you're passively looking, or whether you're status quo and planning your business for the next 3 years. The one thing that they all have is objective. So the question then is, how do we align with that, and how do we communicate value in that context? So John, this is where we were at the beginning, which is what's the actionable definition of value? And there's a couple of reasons you want an actionable definition of value. One is that most buyers don't really have their own definition. If you talk to them, they have requirements documents, they have objectives, they might even have some measurements that they want to hit and so on. But when you ask them this plain, simple question, how do you define value? Most buyers are challenged to give you a definition. So if you can actually share a definition with them that they could buy into, that they see as being practical and useful from their perspective, then I would argue that you've taken the inside track on that sale, because if they are willing to buy your definition of value, then it makes it easier to continue that dialogue and continue to demonstrate how you can actually meet that expectation of value. But the challenge is that, and I've done this as a social experiment, you can get 5 salespeople together, ask them to define value, and you'll end up with 7 definitions, because the first 2 will change their mind based on what the next 3 say. And so if you can't define value, if there's no North Star, if the goalposts keep moving, then how are you supposed to score? So this is why we, with our clients, work towards an actionable definition. So the first thing is, let's look at value in the traditional sense. You know, we had the era around the time that I started selling, which was way back. We had the era of the elevator pitch, and just think of what that means. You have an executive, you're holding him hostage in an elevator, trying to get him to buy from you, and everybody's surprised that when the doors spring open, the person bolts out. From there, we graduated to the unique selling proposition, and that was interesting for a while in the 90s. But if you think about it, all it does is tell the buyer why you're different from the next potential vendor, but it doesn't really help them understand why you should buy. And then we evolved. We got to value propositions. And being that English is my 3rd language, I have this propensity for looking at the dictionary. So what I found is that if you look at the definition of value, a proposition, and you apply it to value proposition, I think in the long run, you could put lipstick on it, but it's still very much a pitch. So the definition of value that we use, an actionable definition, is that buyers will see value in an offering that helps them overcome hurdles, remove obstacles, or bridge gaps between where they are and where their objectives are. So that's the definition of value, John. Any opinions on it? Any questions?
No, I really feel that helps clarify, and I agree with you that I think too many salespeople pitch, and I think that if they just spent more time listening, asking open-ended questions and listening, that they'd learn enough to figure out a way to add value to the person in front of them. And ultimately, my philosophy is sales is a service. And if you're there to help that person grow as opposed to make as much money as you can off them, not only will that person be a customer for life, but they'll drag their friends with them.
Yeah, and I think that, if you can talk, objectives are much more open-ended, right? If you think about pain and need, it's somewhat immediate. If we use another model from sales, it's like open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions. And there are times when closed-ended questions are the proper tool. But when it comes to, I think, engaging somebody who's not even thinking about buying, the most logical place to engage is around where they're trying to go, because they may not perceive a problem, but there might be some things that you can help them either accelerate that path, make it a bit less daunting, or whatever the case might be. And a simple way to put this into practice, and I do this regularly, is if you're sitting with a senior decision maker, one of the questions, let's say I was working with you, John, I might say to you, John, if we were sitting here 18 months from now, and you were telling me that your team had hit a grand slam, what would that look like? And what you find interesting is you physically see them change. You see them sort of look up a little bit, they think a little bit, because you've just given them permission to step out of the pressures of today and project 18 months into the future. So they're starting to think of, what does nirvana look like, when we get there? And the hardest thing for a lot of salespeople, I find at this point, is to just take it all in. Instead of jumping in and interrupting them when you hear a word that you were searching for, let them talk. This is a good time to pick up a pen and paper and just write down the notes and just let them talk as long as they're talking, because you've gotten them to think about the future. Where do I want to be in 18 months? So it's going to take them a second to prime that pump and get to it. And as they go through it, and if you don't interrupt them, the only voice they can begin to listen to is their own, and they begin to evaluate, and often you see them out loud thinking through their thoughts, because again, you've allowed them to go somewhere where they've been wanting to go, but just haven't had the opportunity because today keeps getting in the way. So if you let that process unfold, like, letting a tea steep itself, right? If you let that process unfold, at the very end of that, whether it's 3 minutes that they've spoken or 20 minutes that they've spoken, you have the opportunity to review a few of the things that they said, and then step back and say, you know what, John, I see where you're going. I get your vision. I understand. I just have one question. Help me understand why we're not there today. And in the process of them now telling you why they're not where they wanted to be 18 months from now, you will find an opportunity to have a meaningful conversation. But it had nothing to do with today's pain. It had nothing to do with what we can get out of the way today, but by getting them to think about the future and beginning to paint a path towards their future together, there is an assumption that you can help them with their short-term pain if they happen to be one of those buyers. So I'm going to argue that if you focus and lead with objectives, you have a greater opportunity with connecting and engaging with all three types of buyers, and regardless of where they are from purchase, because again, the idea is to talk about objectives. So if they're 24 months from a particular decision, or they're not even thinking about it, then how can I begin to talk about certain objectives that they have that will allow the conversation to come back to what, the service that I'm offering. If it's somebody that's passive, taking a cue from marketing, they've moved into consideration stage, my messaging has to be different. They've now eliminated certain options and they're trying to validate the options that they're in. They're not quite ready to buy the product, and that's where a lot of salespeople lose ground, is because while the customer is thinking about their options, they're already pitching product instead of helping the customer think through their options. And if you help them think through their options, there's a greater likelihood that they're going to look to you for how they should exercise those options as well. So that's why, to me, objectives are the best thing to lead with, because first of all, pain is short term, so you can take an aspirin and you're okay by morning, whereas objectives are long term, they're uplifting, and they're always out there ahead of you, right? You can get past the pain, but like the horizon, objectives continue to be out there, and you continue to need to reach for them, to strive for them, and most of the time you're going to need help, hopefully help in the form of what you sell. So does that help with the definition of value?
It does, and I love the suggestion to let people talk, because you never know where they're going to go or what they're going to say, but you will learn. And when you let somebody talk, they'll actually fall in love with you, because people love to be heard.
I tell salespeople that if you do nothing else but shut up, they'll remember you because it was the only time they got a chance to talk with a salesperson in the room. So,
I love that.
So again, the thing that they have in common is objective. And I'm not sure I don't know if this poll was supposed to be there, but it's not since I already gave the answer. So as I mentioned before, the power of objection, the strength of objections is that they're clear, they're measurable, they're generally tied to a business outcome. So people will generally say, you know, they're looking to increase profits by X%, they're looking to reduce, you know, expenses by so much. So there's generally a specific business reason behind objectives. Whereas, you know, if it's not tied to a business outcome, it generally could be subjective. And that's where we've all had as salespeople, where we find a buyer who's got a passion for something and we go along with them, they just fail to bring along their colleagues to complete the purchase, as it were. And as I mentioned before, pain is short term, whereas the objectives are much more uplifting, and people can't get enough of it, especially if they get a positive outcome from it. So I want to share how we do the execution, but I need to launch an Excel sheet to do that. So maybe we can handle a couple of questions while I do this gingerly in the background.
Okay. I'm looking through the Q&A doc, and so far we don't have any questions. So now is a good time to type them in while Tibor is pulling up the spreadsheet. I'd love to hear from any of you if you've ever been in a sales situation where that applies to some of the concepts that Tibor is raising. We do have a question here. Bridge gaps implies that a bridge would be a solution. Objectives are achieved along a journey with potentially multiple paths and multiple solutions. Doesn't seem like it's a question. It's more like a definition. So
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I would buy into it. I mean, again, that's one of the advantages, is that as you help your customers achieve objectives, it offers the opportunity to then identify new objectives, because as they have success in one area, that opens up opportunities in others. So if you can help them reduce the cost of their raw materials, which allows them to increase margins in the process, it might then help them fund the project that you can then sell into. So the thing about objectives is that they tend to build on themselves, and companies and leadership expect their people to have objectives, whereas pain, you know, once you're cured, you know, there's no need for you.
Okay, take us away.
So I need to
If you need more time, I have one more question I can do.
Go ahead. I just need to figure out how to share this other screen. Go ahead.
So here's a question from Scott. What's the best way to build a sales tool stack? And my answer to that is I think that foundationally a sales stack starts with contacts, because ultimately you need to manage your contacts effectively. And you should think about your sales contacts as more than just prospects and customers. There's a community around you that you should be nurturing in order to achieve your goals. And ideally, your constituencies, what I call the contacts, includes the influencer of your prospect. Because if I was selling to small businesses, I might connect with their lawyer or their accountant or their technology advisor. But ultimately, it starts with contacts. And then on top of that, I would include tools that give me sales intelligence. Because ultimately, if you have contacts that aren't clean, that don't have the information, the right contact information, their background, their title, their company, their location, their email, all these things are connection and communication abilities. And most salespeople, I think, fall down when they have to go and Google all that stuff. So in data enrichment and personalization on companies and people is critical. And then on top of that, salespeople need a rifle and a map. And the map is the sales intelligence, and the rifle is some type of templating email outreach tool, not necessarily something that you could blast people with, but something that you could effectively segment and target people with one-to-one relevant message at scale, with the ability to track opens and clicks. So I hope that helps, Scott. And Tibor, let me know if you're ready, and or I could do another question.
No, if you see the activity calculator, I'm ready.
Okay, I do.
Cool. So in terms of how to bring this into execution, both from the sales manager's point of view and the individual contributor, I do believe that metrics and numbers count. So if you were to look at camps, I come from the one that says sales is a numbers game. So as a simple example, let's say somebody had a target of, let's say, 1,500,000. And let's say their average deal size was, I don't know, $78,000. So we hit the calculate, and what we see right away is clearly they're going to have to sell 125,000 per month, and it's going to be roughly at these raw numbers about 1.6 deals on a monthly basis. So each salesperson at this point has to understand what their numbers are, and if you don't understand what your numbers are, it's okay. You just have to start tracking them, and over time you'll begin to know them. But generally, we start with the question that for every 10 legitimate proposals that you submit, so not spaghetti proposals, but legitimate proposals, out of every 10, on average, how many close? So let's say the person says about 35% of these close. And again, same question, of 10 people that go into discovery with you, how many will take a real proposal? Again, not a spaghetti proposal, but a real proposal. So let's say 40%. And then the last data point that they need to know is that for every 10 initial engagements that they have, so whether it's a face-to-face meeting, Zoom meeting, COVID meeting, whatever, that first interaction where the buyer decides, are we going to continue this journey or are we not? How many of those initial meetings the buyer comes out and says, I'm not promising anything, but you've said enough interesting things that will continue this journey into discovery. And let's say you come out with about 50%. So when we hit calculate, what we see is that in order to deliver against your number, you're going to have to, again, come up with 1.6 deals per month. You're going to need to have 5 proposals on a monthly basis, which means you need to have 11 opportunities going through discovery, and you're going to have to generate 23 new meetings, assuming you didn't have referrals and upsells and things along those lines. So the thing to keep in mind is that each of these then also has the cost of time. So if you have 11 clients in discovery and you need to meet with them twice on a monthly basis, that's 22 meetings. Add to that the prep time, and if we ever get to leave lockdown ever, then the drive time and so on. So any changes that you make in this also have a positive impact on time. And generally, where we take this from an execution point of view, the more that you're applying and digging for objectives, the more these numbers should change. And so what we find is that the higher you are in the scale, the more of a positive impact the change has. So let's say John was my manager, and I said to him, John, I think I can do better. If I do all the things that you've been telling me in terms of targeting and so forth, I'd like to work with you between now and the end of the year to get my average ticket up to $85,000 instead of the 78. So a modest increase. We're not, looking to break anybody's back, right? So if we hit calculate, what you'll see is now it brings down the number of proposals that you'll have to generate. Still have to have 11 people through discovery, but now you have to generate less appointments. You have to generate less appointments. You have more time to do a better job in discovery, to ask the proper questions, to be patient. John and I both spoke about the time of letting things happen in a controlled fashion. If you're able to free up time, then you'll be able to do that more effectively. So let's say I have success with the set out coaching that I asked John to give me around getting this to 85K. And the next quarter, we say, coming back from January, let's say I say to John, I want to work on this and get it up to at least the same level as I have people going through discovery. So by changing that to 40%, we hit calculate again. And as you can see, the number of appointments comes down dramatically. I free up time. I free up stress. I don't have that pressure of where am I going to get my next conversation. The number of discoveries have come down, which means I could be more thorough in my targeting. I could do a better job of selling a higher ticket item because I can think about what potential upsells and complementary things might happen. And clearly the number of deals that we need goes down. And it's a lot like painting a bridge. As soon as you finish one and you got to start again. So it's a question of which element of your game do you want to improve. And when it comes down to messaging and execution, clearly each of these is going to require you to focus on a different element of your game, a different way to deliver your narrative, and a different way to execute your sale. So we use this with our clients to help them develop coaching plans, but tie it to specific things. So much like we're telling them to tie their value statements to specific objectives and business outcomes that the customer has, these changes in coaches and changes in the metrics need to be tied to specific things that the salesperson has. So whether it's a element of their incentive or some other factor, if it doesn't have meaning for them, then they're just numbers on a page. So in conclusion, we've talked about communicating value in a way that actually aligns with where the person is vis-a-vis their thinking about a purchase. And let's face it, 70% of the market is not thinking about any sort of purchase at all. So, it's better to orient the message that way. Once you have it, I think it's a question of communicating it in a way that resonates with that individual. As I mentioned, focus on objectives as opposed to pain, because that's only going to resonate with one part of the market. And then it is a question of continuous improvement. So I think that the whole thing should start by sitting down with your manager and coming up with a coaching plan that is actually tied to your numbers, your performance, and your ability to execute. And that's my story for the day, and I'm sticking to it. As I go back to the PowerPoint, because there's some other things that we want to share. Are there any questions?
Yes, we do have a number of questions. Let me go ahead and I'll go ahead and ask you them. Let's start with this one here. Neil asked, objectives always seem to be on the back burner while pain seems to be more timely. How do you balance the focus of the prospect?
The questions that you asked. So I look at sales as being like a game of Jeopardy, right? I'm more worried about the question I asked than the answer. So if you understand why you're winning deals, which means you have to do the work of reviewing them, you can begin to see areas that are fruitful for good conversation. You begin to see areas where you can actually help them identify gaps. If I can give a quick example, when I'm working with a VP of sales, one of the first questions I ask early in the game is, John, I'm curious how much of your current revenue comes from existing clients versus brand new customers or new logos. And they usually give me a number like 90-10, or they give me a number like 85-15. And I go, great. So if we looked at your 2020 plan, what did you have in there? And I don't know if it's MBA school or what, but they always say 80-20. But in 17 years of using that question, never has the person given me the same number, which means in 2 questions, I got them inadvertently to put a gap on the table. That difference in numbers is never going back in the bottle. So from there, I can have a great discussion. One of the other questions I ask, I was reading this article, John, that suggested that only about 53% of B2B forecasts are accurate. I don't even have to wait for their answer. The look in their eyes will tell me which side of that line they're on. So all of those allow me to lead with gaps that I know that role has that lead to fruitful conversation. Does that help?
I think it does. Hopefully that helped you, Neil. And I agree with you, Tibor, that I think that most forecasts are really wildly inaccurate. And that's why I think that most CRM systems are in many ways ineffective if you're simply relying them on the forecasts themselves. I think that the number one thing that a CRM should do is empower that customer-facing business team member being more effective at organizing their contacts and managing their processes and measuring their output to the results. And then a manager can compare that to their peers, especially the peers that are producing more, and apply best practices to those that aren't doing those things. Another question by Scott was, what are the examples of the rifles? And so I love analogies, and thanks for the question, Scott. So I think that when you think about market automation, what is that? So if you have a website and you drive eyeballs to the website, you capture those eyeballs and you convert those into a qualified lead. How do you do that? Well, the first time they come to your website, you might just have an IP address. The next time they come to a website, you might get an email. The next time you might get a name or whatever else. But once you do get an email, then you basically create a record. And once that record is lead qualified, and that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but once it's lead qualified, you give it to the rep. In many cases, the quote lead qualified lead that goes to the sales rep doesn't really have much information about that person or the company, and the sales reps basically sort of left on their own to do whatever they do. So market automation is like a bomber over the battlefield that softens up the battlefield for the soldiers to go in, because for you to win a war, you need to put boots on the ground in most cases. So the soldier, when they go on the ground, needs a map and they need a rifle. And so the map is the business intelligence that gives them who that person is, what their company is about, basically the stuff that they would typically have to do by doing their homework. The rifle is the tool that once they do know who the person is and what the business is about, they use the rifle to engage to drive a conversation that enables them to do what the salesperson is really, really good at, is the whole thing that you just talked about here. So a rifle is typically a templated tracking tool that allows you to build email templates for outreach with attachments, and then the ability to track opens and clicks. The examples of these, there's things like Outreach.io, there's things like salesloft.com, and there's other things like Nimble. Outreach.io and salesloft.com are add-ins to whatever CRM you have, and they typically cost $100 to $300 per rep per month. Nimble is a combination of tools that includes the contact management or CRM, whatever you want to call it, the sales intelligence, and the outreach tool, the templated email tracking, all in one. So hopefully that helps. Next question is, how has the shift to virtual meetings affected the parameters in your opinion? So I'm going to give this to you, Tibor.
I mean, I don't think it's changed it much. You know, as you see, I tend to think in circles. And to me, the outside stuff is sometimes just busy work. So yes, you need to be conscious of the camera and how you position it, and you need to be conscious of the lighting. You need to think about how you conduct the meeting. So if there's multiple people on the other side, it's not like being in the room where you can say, let's go around and introduce each other. You have to take control of that process. And, you know, if you have a counterpart who's helping you organize the meeting on the other side, maybe get them to introduce their folks, so that way it's a controlled environment. So all those things are important, and there's plenty of good things out there talking about some of the physical realities of virtual selling, both in terms of considering what the customer is going through, not just their altered physical space, because our customers are now working in their basements as well, but the other things around them, the intangibles. You know, they're worried about their kids, they're worried about their loved ones. Some of them are worried about their economic future and so on. So all those things need to be taken into account, but not to the point where a lot of salespeople uses it as an excuse not to sell. So I think we need to be cognizant of the physical realities, but I don't think I would make wholesale changes to the core approach. I know that I haven't, and you know, business has not suffered as a result.
I'd agree with you, Tibor. I don't think that going digital really changes much, except for maybe some of the processes around it, but it still is the basics. Another question from David, very interesting. Never been involved in sales. Any tips for selling yourself? Selling consultancy services scares me to death. And I'm going to take a stab at this, Tibor. David, my advice to you is don't sell. Nobody likes to be sold. People don't buy great products or services. They buy a better version of themselves. So if I were you, what I would do if you are going to be selling consulting services is give your knowledge away. Basically, you've forgotten more about whatever it is you're selling than most of your customers will ever know in their lifetime. And so drip your knowledge on a daily basis so that you become the trusted advisor. So when they need your products and services, they not only pick up the phone, but they drag their friends with them. And so I think that if you think about outreaching to people and pounding them with advertising and telling them how great your products and services are, you're going to be disappointed. But if you don't sell yourself and you sell other people a better version of themselves, where you are teaching them how they can achieve their dreams better, smarter, faster, make them the hero in the center of the story, I think that you will be better off. Tibor, what do you think?
100%. I mean, I think, again, the whole idea is to have a conversation. Our job is to lead that conversation in a mutually beneficial direction. But, I think that what John said at the beginning, if you're a consultant, let your expertise, lead the thing. There's nothing you can say or do that won't be validated by your expertise. So get them to talk and then demonstrate your expertise. And what you'll find is that the greater value they see in that, the more they'll talk, and the more you'll have an opportunity to help them. But I don't think you should sell. I think you should just be yourself.
Yeah, amen. Here's one for you, Tibor, from Jeff. If you've been pitching to their pains for a while with a potential lead, what's a good way to start turning it into concentrating on their objectives without it seeming like you're just trying a different approach?
Easiest way is to say, I've been thinking about you because I recently met with one of my other clients and they're doing this. And that's when you pivot forward. And that way you're a conduit to best practices. You're not pitching, you're bringing experience from another customer who they might identify with more than you as a salesperson. And it allows you to change the direction of the conversation.
And you know what I love about that, Tibor, is the human aspect of I've been thinking about you, right?
Yeah.
Like
people love that.
People love that, right? How many emails do you get that just don't feel human and authentic? But if you actually, and I'm going to give you a little analogy here. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the direct mail pieces that you used to get that were sort of trifold, courier type with yellow highlighting, and there might even been misspellings on it. And it looked like somebody was actually talking to you. And then contrast with a slick willy thing that was printed up on a laser printer and looked like really glossy and slick. Which one do you think you paid attention to more? What do you think, Tibor?
The glossy and slick.
Nah, the basic, simple courier yellow highlighting. And I could tell you this because I tested millions of direct mail pieces, and sometimes the more human and simpler is actually the better. Another question.
That's why I'm in sales, not a marketer.
Carlos asked, recently a sales team member at one of my prospects asked me, will this Nimble help me sell more? I found out later this individual is resisting change to the company's sales process or introduction of technology. Any thoughts on the appropriate response or answer to this type of question from a resistor? I'll go ahead and take a stab at this, Tibor. The thing is I think that the biggest problem with CRM is lack of use, and second is bad data. There's 225 million global businesses. Less than 1% use any CRM. Most people's CRM is a spreadsheet, their inbox, or social. And the reason why is, and the reason why they call it Salesforce, you have to force salespeople to use it. And the problem is you as a salesperson work for the CRM, and it doesn't work for you. You go and Google somebody before a meeting. You have to go type what you know, and you have to go to the CRM to do it. And you're really living in email. And basically, it's not providing you with the context and insights that you need in order to engage and follow up and follow through. And so the CRM stands for customer relationship management, but actually it should stand for customer reporting management, because CRM was actually designed for management reporting, not customer engagement. If you go back to Act and Goldmine, they were all about empowering that customer-facing business team member to manage their contacts and engage, and that's why they loved it. But the problem was management wanted to control the contacts, and they didn't like salespeople having their own contacts, and they wanted reporting. So Siebel came out with a CRM that was enterprise level, and then basically Salesforce made that in a cloud environment, and we are where we're at today. And so what you should do is, rather than telling them, you should teach them how Nimble is going to help them. And I think the basics is get down to the analogy of the rifle and the map, right? They get a lead. What are they going to do? basically, it's their job to know who that person is, what the company is about. Nimble helps them by enriching context with people and company data. And then they got to engage to start a conversation. Nimble helps them with social and templated outreach. So you got to show them how it's going to save them time, and time is money, honey. What do you think, Tibor?
Time is money. It's the only non-renewable resource. Again, if you think back to the calculator, everything was about freeing up time because it's your most valuable resource.
Yes. Okay. So I think I got them all. Tibor, I don't know if you have the questions open, but let me just go through them really quick to make sure I didn't miss any. If you've been pitching to their page for all of it, okay, got that. Recently, okay, got that. Converted to passive action. Okay, Tibor, why don't you bring the deck back up and switch from that view. You've got the presenter view going right now. Switch to the other display setting, and then go to your CTA. We'll get people out here on time. Switch it to, yep. Okay, tell us about your CTA. We're up one more time, Tibor.
I'm sorry?
You're still in the presenter display, so switch the display to, you didn't quite get it. Swap it.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. It's just not going my way.
Okay. You know what? We'll just leave it like that.
How's that?
Go to the slide that says CTA right there. Okay, tell us about your CTA.
So basically, in addition to running Renbor Sales Solutions, I'm also a founding member of the Proactive Prospecting Club, which is at proactiveprospecting.club, not .com. And basically, it's a resource that is built for B2B salespeople who have to prospect for a living. It includes a range of courses, materials, different types of inputs from different vendors, different tools, a host of things. And what we're offering to people on this webinar is, along with a 90-day trial that's free, they will get 50% off the first year of membership if they use the code PPC50 when they check out. And again, you can find it all at proactiveprospecting.club, not .com.
Okay, thank you so much. Next slide. And for those listening today who haven't tried Nimble out, if you go to nimble.com offers webinar 30, you'll get a 30-day trial instead of the normal 2-week free trial. No credit card required. If you're listening to this today, I want to tell you a story about your most valuable asset. I think it's your brand and your network. And excuse me, you should be working on your brand and network on a daily basis, because your network is your net worth. Your personal brand plus your professional network will help you achieve your dreams in life. And I hope your dreams are centered on helping other people achieve theirs, because the more people that you help grow, the more you will grow. And so that means that you need to be managing your contacts personally and professionally. So even if you work at a company today and they give you a CRM, you should have a personal CRM, and Nimble is that. So Nimble, excuse me, I'm just gonna take a sip of water. So Nimble can either be your personal CRM that works with your company CRM, which means you could actually have it work within Salesforce or Dynamics or HubSpot or whatever your company is using. Or if your company doesn't have a CRM, then it could be your CRM in order to help your salespeople engage. But if you're thinking about just using a CRM for helping your salespeople engage with prospects and customers, you're missing more than half the boat, because not just salespeople touch the customer. Everybody in your company is part of the cycle of engagement with the constituency around your business. And what's missing in all businesses today is a team relationship manager, because G Suite and Office have a separate contact database for every team member, and those contacts don't have email and calendar integrations, let alone social. And so you should have a unified relationship manager for your business. I'm so sorry. So if you do decide to try Nimble and want to sign up, use the code Jon40 and you get 40% off your first 3 months. Boy, that was a worst hacking I think I've ever done in my my career, and I apologize for that. So I think that we go to the contact screens. There should be a slide that says how they can get a hold of us.
And there certainly is.
Okay, so there is the contact info for Tibor. If you want to get a hold of me, here's my last tip for you. Before people are going to meet with you, they're going to Google you, and you should Google yourself right now. Just Google your name. And if you don't show up on the first page, in fact, fill the first page, then you need to work on that. Google me, Jon Ferrara, Jon-Ferrara. You'll see that I fill the page, but most importantly, you'll see a Wikipedia page on the right-hand side, and that's my tip of the day. Build a Wikipedia page for yourself. It's easy and it's free. All you got to do is document and cite external documents that support whatever you're saying, and Google loves that, and they'll publish that in the right-hand side as a box, and it'll increase your search stuff. If you want to get a hold of me, Google me. You'll see that I have identities on all the places that people typically have conversations, or reach out to me at Jon@Nimble, Jon@Nimble.com. Let me know, let our team know how we can help you achieve your dreams in life, because I think that's why we're on this planet, that we grow by helping other people grow. Tibor, why don't you take us away with some parting thoughts?
Parting thoughts is, if you're in sales and you're out to help your customers, as long as it's legal and ethical, give it a go, because you never know where it'll take you. But if you stick too rigidly to a plan, then you'll miss a lot of things on the side. So if you can sort of leave your product in the car and go into meet your customers with a blank canvas and see what you can paint up together.
Amen. And with that, have a amazing rest of the day. Thank you for taking your time to spend with us. Good luck and good selling. Thank you, Tibor. Appreciate your.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for having me, Jon.
You bet. Take care.
Bye.